Mysterious ambient music begins softly. In the year 1633, the world of science came to a screeching halt beneath the unrelenting gaze of faith. Pause. Welcome to a different kind of courtroom, where celestial bodies were silent witnesses and ideologies clashed on a grand, unforgiving stage. This is the story of Galileo Galilei, a man whose discoveries changed the way humanity understood the universe, but who paid an extraordinary price for daring to look beyond the stars. Sound of a distant ticking clock fades in. But before we dive into the trial of Galileo, let us ask, how far would society go to silence a mind seeking the truth? Soft strings hum, rising in intensity. To unravel this question, we must peel back the layers of a time when to question authority was not just dangerous, it was heresy. It was the early 17th century, an age where science was fledgling, faith was institutional, and obedience to divine interpretations was absolute. The Catholic Church stood at the apex of societal control. The Church was not merely a spiritual guide, it was the ultimate authority over morality, nature, and even the stars themselves. Whispered voices and soft organ music underscore the narration. Galileo Galilei, an Italian astronomer, physicist, and mathematician, was no ordinary figure. His name had already begun to echo across European salons and courtyards. With his meticulously crafted telescope, Galileo discovered moons orbiting Jupiter, proving that not everything revolved around the Earth. But his revelation was more than a scientific insight. It was a direct challenge to the geocentric worldview, which aligned conveniently with church teachings. Pulsing drumbeat builds anticipation. By 1616, Galileo's views were condemned as foolish and absurd. Phrases charged not merely with denial but with palpable fear. The fear that knowledge and inquiry might unravel the carefully woven narrative of divine perfection. But why such vehement opposition? Why would the Church feel threatened by this lone stargazer? The answer lies in the deeply entrenched belief of the era, that the heavens were the physical embodiment of divine order. If the cosmos was flawed, destabilized, or, heaven forbid, ever-changing, it presented a crack in the very foundation of spiritual and institutional power. Close-up of Quill writing a document fades in, alongside the narrator speaking. Galileo, however, was not a man easily silenced. Despite warnings and even formal injunctions, he pressed forward. In 1632, his most daring work, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, was published. This masterpiece, a comparative dialogue between the Copernican and Ptolemaic models, subtly but unmistakably leaned in favor of the sun-centered, heliocentric universe. The Church, seeing itself thinly veiled as the stubborn defender of outdated models, viewed this text as not just dangerous, but seditious. Creaking sound of heavy wooden doors opening. And so Galileo was summoned to Rome. For anyone else, this would have been a death sentence, a one-way journey into oblivion. But Galileo was no ordinary man. What followed was, perhaps, the most famous trial of science and faith in human history. Courtroom ambiance fades in, hushed but tense. The trial of Galileo captured the imagination of Europe. Was it a battle of reason versus religion? Or, more tragically, was it a grim exposé of power's grip over uncertainty? Bell chime punctuates the next sequence. At the heart of this spectacle stood Galileo in his elder years, his hair faded but his voice resolute. He faced the congregation of the Holy Office, the Inquisition, an assembly wielding the terrifying authority of life and death. Inquisition records reveal Galileo's earnest attempts to defend his work, though he was ultimately portrayed as a defiant challenger of God's laws. To judge Galileo solely as a victim, however, misses the nuances of the time. He understood the risk of questioning. He knew the precarious dance between loyalty to intellectual discovery and surrender to institutional authority. Soft crescendo of violins begins as the narrator continues. Under threats of torture, imprisonment, and perhaps even death, Galileo ultimately recanted his theories. And yet, according to legend, as he rose from his knees after his renunciation, he murmured the famous words, "Et pour si muove," and yet it moves. Whether this brave assertion was whispered, imagined, or symbolically assigned, one thing became clear in the centuries to follow. The truth has a way of outliving its oppressors. Pensive piano music takes over continually. Galileo's trial did not mark the end of discovery. His condemnation became a symbol of the enduring conflict between control and courage, between dogma and the boundless human spirit. It also forces us to examine a perennial truth, that fear, not faith, was the true tool of suppression used in this and so many other instances of history's darkest acts. Slow zoom into the night sky, stars bright against the darkness. For centuries, humanity has peered into the heavens, seeking answers to our existence. The trial of Galileo is not just a cautionary tale, but a timeless reminder of what's at stake when we limit inquiry to preserve our comfort. Pause, followed by a soft but haunting orchestral swell. Today, we like to think we live in a world where science and freedom prevail. But the story of Galileo dares us to ask a haunting question. Have we truly left behind the fear of questioning authority? Or has it merely taken new forms, shrouded in subtler disguises? Final piano keys echo in the silence as the screen fades to black. In the end, Galileo's stars continued to shine, long after his earthly struggles ended. In their silent, endless light lies a reminder. You can attempt to silence a discovery, but you cannot dim the wonder of those who quest for truth. Music fades out, leaving only soft chimes of celestial sounds. This story is part of our Chronicles of History series. For more tales where the past speaks to our present, subscribe and share your thoughts below. How do you think history repeats itself in our times today? Voice fades out. Screen pauses on the question.